Good morning again. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Andrew Witschonke. I imagine most of you. I'm the Director of Engineering for our Players platform at UIUX. For those of you who don't know UIUX, we mostly do custom software, a lot in FileMaker. We have a team of about 50 devs these days, so we do quite a bit. We also have a couple of products. Most of you are probably familiar with Vince's product, Inspector Pro, hiding in the back there. We've been doing this for 20, I think it's 26 years. I think Julian will correct me.
28.
28, there you go. So been around a while. I've been at UIUX 7 years. And really what I'm here to talk to you about is a technique we've been using on quite a few of our, many dozens of our production systems. A little technique that we started using about 6 years ago that I think opens up quite a few opportunities and you might be able to leverage in your own application. Without further ado, when I talk about, like I said, I call this session the user sandbox. You might hear me slip up at some point and call it the local file. That's what we've kind of normally internally referred to it as. Know that I didn't mean to. User sandbox and local file are the same thing. But what is it? Well, about 6 years ago, I was having coffee, actually, with Vince, and we were talking about how wouldn't it be great if you could have records or tables and fields and things like that were session bound the same way globals are. And how that would open up a whole bunch of UIUX opportunities, a whole bunch of user interaction opportunities, things like that, data integrity and performance. And we kind of spitballed a little bit and thought about this idea, well, what if your hosted file had a little baby FileMaker file in it, and on first when it opened, it exported it to a temp directory somewhere, and then you reference that file. And now that file is unique to that user's computer, and they can put whatever they want in it. I went home because I had a project where I had a need to use that kind of technique. Went home, experimented a little bit, and actually it worked, surprisingly enough. So what you end up with is, rather than just the normal relationship where you have a client communicating directly with FileMaker server, for every interaction they have, except for maybe global fields, you end up with this user sandbox where they can interact instead with this local file, the sandbox file, alternatively, depending on what it is you're actually trying to leverage. So we're just talking, out of the box, we get standard fields. They're persistent data stored on the server. You get all the benefits of them being searchable, indexable. You can do calculations, unstored or stored, summary fields, all the great kind of advantages that you get with fields. Then we have globals, also great. They're session bound, unique to that user, and they're all local, so there's no performance hit on the network, right? That's all just happening on the user machine. So what this is really kind of the best of both of those. Get all the advantages of the complexity and the intricacy and whatnot of a traditional table and field and records, but with them being unique to that user session. And there are ways that you can leverage this technique to improve and build some UIs and UX things that would be otherwise rather challenging to make, in my opinion, in FileMaker, as well as potentially enhance your application's data integrity, meaning that you're more confident in the data that gets into your system in the first place, and as well as improve performance, in particular for users who are accessing it over the WAN. If you're on a LAN, maybe not, but we'll talk more about that later. So what are we talking about in terms of how does this work? How do we implement it? Well, it's actually pretty straightforward. I alluded to it kind of at the top of the presentation. First, you create a little FileMaker Pro application, and you store it in container fields in your hosted application. You then, on first window open, you export it to the temp directory, and you use a global variable to store that path. You can then add that FileMaker file as an external FileMaker reference using that global variable, and then start adding table occurrences to the graph to that file. So again, you now have table occurrences in your hosted file referencing tables from that sandbox user file that can then be unique to that user session. So I'm going to go through a quick tutorial, not tutorial per se, but a quick demo of how easy it is to implement, just to prove I'm not lying to you that it's easier. You're saying it's easier than it really is. This video is about 2 minutes. This recording I have about 2 minutes. This is not meant to be a tutorial. We can talk more about this in the Q&A section at the end, but really I just want to kind of show you the steps in real time. So first I'm going to create a new FileMaker profile. just going to call it sandbox. Use the default fields. Obviously, you'd customize it to your needs. This is the hosted file here. I'm going to add a container field to store that FileMaker file. Add the layout so I can actually store it somewhere. There we are. Now we're going to, this doesn't have an on first window open script yet, so we're going to write one real quick. First, we're going to go to the right context and show all records, kind of normal stuff. Make sure you're looking at record that has the file. And I'm going to create a global variable that's going to be the path for where I'm going to export that file to. I'm going to use the temporary path, get temporary path function, as well as the file name of the container file. And then just simple export field contents to that global variable path. Then we're going to obviously set up that on first window open script. No problem. I'm going to run that script so that it actually is in the temp directory. I'm going to go to manage database. Sorry, I'm going to add this external reference first, excuse me. Again, so it's called sandbox. Use the global variable as the path. Now we'll go to manage database and we can add a new table occurrence referencing that table we just saw earlier with the default users. I'm just going to ask you to authorize it, normal stuff. There you can see, there's our table with those default fields on it that's coming from the file that is in the temp directory. So that's kind of the high level of how you would add this to an existing hosted application. So why would you add it to a hosted application? So the first one we're talking about is how it can enhance what kind of UIs you can build and how it simplifies things that you might already be doing with different techniques, but might be worth considering this as an alternative. I think most of us probably have built applications with portal filters or storing IDs of a selected child record, or run into that challenge where you use globals to drive those things, but then the client's like, oh, I want it to support multi-window. And then how do you support a case where you have look at the same record and things are selected differently in each window? How do you handle that with globals? This can solve some of those problems. So let's look at the demo real quick. I'm going to go ahead and open up my demo file. That's right, I have to play it. There we go. Sorry. We're looking at pair computers. We have their retail locations here on the left. And then a list of employees in the middle column and their respective shifts for a selected week there at the drop down at the top. We can, and this is just a little tour of what the app does, just so you're looking, like change the week, shifts change. We can also filter that list. Let's look at Tate here, and you'll see the list filtered down to that. And then I can select Tate, and the third column will populate with his details. So here, everything you're looking at is posted data, except for the filter, the week selection, and on the back end, an ID of what user selected to populate third portal. Now, if I go to another record, it reverts to some other state. Different week, we're looking still in November rather than December. The filter state's gone and the selection state's gone. I'm going to filter this to some other set. Look at Intel, look at his detail. If I go back to Buena Vista, it remembers exactly where I left off, because that filter state and selection state are in a record in the sandbox file related to that hosted record for that user, exactly, unique to their session. But no matter what I do, that is persistent as the user navigates through the system. So it always picks up exactly where you left off. That's all fine and good. You might say, okay, I can do that with a global variable or a global field and be juggling stuff in and out of that on record load or something like that. Fair enough. This is probably a little simpler because it's less scripting, but you could do it other ways. Multi-windows where it starts to be really cool. But now we're looking at the same store in two different windows, and you already notice the rear window, we're still filtered to Tate, looking at the week of 12/10. In the front, we're looking at the 11/26 week, not filtered to anything. We can change that around, do whatever we want here, and it doesn't interfere with the state of the UI in the other window. That is because we have a record per window per hosted record. that is storing those variables and then grabbing the related hosted data. Pretty neat, right? Multi-window's kind of always been a bit of a pain for complex UIs. These are just some examples of what you could do with the technique. These are ones I thought might get people's attention, but I'm sure there's other stuff you creative people could come up with. But the idea is that it has the advantages of globals, but then, again, the advantages of being more persistent and having multiple values while still being session bound, because it's per record. Another thing we talked about was the ability to have better data integrity as a result of this. We accomplish this in a lot of our systems because what we do is we take up whatever the user is about to be editing, pull all that data, rebuild it into the sandbox file, and present that in a UI. So you've taken the data completely out of the normal data stream, so any of their changes are not being immediately written to the server. Why would you want to do that? Well, the use case that I actually had originally for using this was a case where a user was modifying a parent record, child record, and grandchild record, and I needed all those grandchild records to sum up to totals all the way up the chain, but they all needed to always be in alignment. There should never have been a case where those values didn't add up, didn't sum correctly. Could I have validated that at some other step using other methods? Sure. The advantage of this, though, is as people are editing it, I can be validating that across the entire data set and not allow them to save those changes back to the server until it meets the validation. It takes it completely out of the data stream. Saves you from having to have those kind of edge cases where some of the data might be right, some of it's wrong, things like that. So again, multi-editing at different levels of the stack also gives the ability to undo all those changes. The user can make 50 changes, 100 changes, whatever, and they can just change their mind. Be like, you know what? This isn't working. Undo, revert, cancel, whatever. None of that actually went to the server yet, so there's no harm, no foul. Let's take a look at what that might actually look like in a UI. We're back to our demo app. I'm going to open up the edit UI. And first, you're going to notice now we're completely in a sandbox context, not looking at any hosted data. I can do some cool UI stuff with unstored calcs. For example, a fully functioning accordion view, just using sub-summary parts. Fully perform it. Works fine. Stuff like that. Kind of fun. Something that, again, would be hard to do natively, quote unquote, or normal FileMaker methods, but you can do using this. So let's go ahead and delete some of these shifts, add some new ones. Add a new shift for Tate here on Tuesday, delete his Monday shift. And let's partially add a new one, but forget to add the close time. Didn't pass validation. You have a shift that doesn't have a close time. You got to go back and fix that. Okay, I'll set a time. You know what? Maybe I want to undo all this. Set it back to how it was before I start editing anything. Well, I can go back down to this revert button here at the bottom. Going to prompt me, are you sure you want to throw away all your changes? We're back to exactly how we were before I changed anything. No, again, no talk to the server, nothing. Because all that data in this case is loaded into JSON, so it just rebuilds the records as they were when they first appeared. Sandbox file. But let's actually make an edit. We're going to go back to Tate, we'll add that Tuesday shift. We're going to delete the Monday shift. And save. Now both of those changes, both the deletion and the edit, were sent to the server and modified together as one potentially transaction. So you get kind of data integrity that way. And you can see there's the two shifts there for Tate on Tuesday and Wednesday. So let's go a little bit more complicated. I just modified one person's shift. Granted, I did a deletion and a creation, but let's do a little bit more complex. I can be looking at Jody here. I'm going to delete all these part-time shifts she has. So delete 3 or 4 shifts. Add a new one on Wednesday, 1 full-time shift. Collapse her again. Go back down to Tate. And then add another shift on Thursday for him. We have quite a few deletions and a couple additions across multiple employees for one store in 1 week. Save that. You'll see up at the top there, Jody only has her 2 full-time shifts, no longer any of her part-time shifts. And you can see Tate has his new 3rd shift. So that's kind of it. It allows you to do just kind of these more complex edits where you're modifying multiple levels of your system architecture at the same time and be able to package all those changes up as one bundle, which lends itself very well to the relatively new transaction script stuffs. You package all those up together to be acted on simultaneously.
So did you lock the parent record? I mean,
it's a very good question, and I talked about it at the end, so I won't. You're ahead of the game, so that was a good question. I anticipated that one would come up, so it does come up. Last thing I talked about was performance benefits. When you take the data out of the data stream, you no longer having as much back and forth between the client and the server for all their interaction. Now, that's a pretty big deal. You can see on the graph here, these are pretty simple examples. It's the first single record, that's one record with 5 fields. How many calls the server did it take for me to modify those 5 fields and commit? Second one is, well, what happens if I commit after every field change for that one record? See a lot more server calls. I'm doing 5 records, 5 fields for 5 records. And then the last is if I'm modifying one parent with 5 children via portal. But you can see in all cases, modifying natively the client just clicking into fields and modifying the hosted data versus packing all those changes and sending the server, far fewer calls to the server. And why does that matter? Well, I've done a little testing. Vince is actually the master of performance testing, really, but this is something I did. This is a relatively simple test. Try to find 100 random records out of a set of 1,000. They're pretty big records, had a giant JSON object on them and stuff like that. But notice that as the network latency increased, relatively linearly, the time to complete went up exponentially. So the fewer calls you can make. Now, if you have a system that's deployed on the LAN, you probably don't care about any of it. So you can close your ears for a second, just bear with me. But if you have users who are accessing a system in Texas from China, let's say, or Australia or something like that, every one of those calls that you can minimize is going to be saving not just a linear amount of time for the user, but an exponential amount of time. So when those milliseconds count, something to consider. So, to your question a little bit earlier, I anticipated that there was going to be some questions. I've taught this internally to both junior devs and interns at Beeswax. So, like, some of these questions have come up before. So, I've anticipated some of them before we get to the actual Q&A. I figured I'd go through a bit of an FAQ in terms of what people normally ask about this technique. So, the first one, isn't maintaining 2 files a real pain? I think a lot of people conflate this with the data separation model, which some of you may be familiar with. It was very in vogue probably about 10 years ago, I would argue. Maybe, I know it's still very popular in some circles. It's not that, though, because it's not as much data as you think, because you're only putting in what you need. You don't need to put in every table, every field from your hosted file into the sandbox file. You only need to put in what you need to do whatever it is you're trying to accomplish. So if you're only using it to edit one type of record, or if you're only using it for UI, just put one table and a couple fields in, no big deal. Like, you don't need everything. Secondly, that file, because again, all the table occurrences live in the hosted file, not in the sandbox file, you end up with not that much in the sandbox file. You have a couple table definitions, field definitions, and unless you need to be driving some unstored calcs or something like that, you maybe have a handful of relationships on the graph. They're normally pretty straightforward, pretty simple files. And then last, and I can't really emphasize this enough, I made the mistake of not realizing the fact that everything could really live in the hosted file and just reference table occurrences in the hosted file until a couple of colleagues who are not there, unfortunately, but Alec Gregory and Christopher Edwards pointed out to me, why are you doing that? Why don't you just do all this work with table occurrences from the hosted file? I was building all my layouts, all my scripts in the sandbox file originally in that first prototype, and that was a huge pain to maintain. Don't do that. Learn from my mistake. Be smarter than me. This is way better. Like everything's in the hosted file. It's super straightforward. The only time you ever need to go in and modify that sandbox file is if you need to add a new table or field. And that's pretty much it. What about record conflicts? The man in the middle there. So really, the answer is it's a bit of a cop-out, but it's up to the developer. So if you're really concerned about it, just use it for UI. That first example I gave, all those extra UI, multi-window support, things like that, there's no impact on the record, on the hosted data, so you can just use it to drive more interesting, more complex user experiences. What works for us 99% of the time we found is just last in wins. Most of the time, and I don't know if it's true for your clients necessarily, but let's say you have a project management application. Typically there's a project manager. And so for a given record, there's typically one person really making changes to that record. So the likelihood of 2 people modifying the same record at the same time we found to be pretty low. So this typically works in most of our scenarios. We might just be lucky, but like that doesn't work for us most of the time. But there are cases where it doesn't, and then it's really up to the developer to figure out what is the correct level of effort you want to put into it. Now you could either not use it at all, or you could mark the record as hosted, the hosted record as checked out when a user goes to edit it. You could also, one thing we've done is the payload that is coming into the sandbox file, you can hash that big JSON object or whatever. You can then also, sorry, not even that file. You hash the changes that are going to be sent back to the server and compare that to a current hash of the current record state. And then you can compare, well, wait a minute, it looks like someone else has modified this since the last time since you started editing. Are you sure you want to do that and give the user the option, or just now you have to restart and reload from fresh data, whatever the case may be. Ultimately, though, it's the developer's choice for what works for the app and the client. Hope that answered the question a little bit.
That's good.
Next up, does it work in FileMaker Go? Yes. Not much else to say. Works pretty exactly the same, no changes necessary. Does it work in WebDirect? No. As most of you know, WebDirect, right? Like the UI is being rendered on the server and then just passed into the browser, basically, like passed you as a web page. So there's no temp directory. There's none of that. Like you don't have that. Some other Bs have come up with workarounds where you could, in theory, host a copy of the sandbox file on the server and conditionally point to it if you detect you're using WebDirect. But now it's not session bound. So is this? If you're using WebDirect, maybe don't use this. Like, I mean, it's kind of that's the long and short of it. It's fine, but I wouldn't recommend it. Is there anything else that I should know about using this technique? Are there any lessons that we've learned? Yes, there definitely are. First, in my little demo of me setting up in under 2 minutes, I use export field contents. Don't actually do that. Use the file script steps, write data file script steps, things like that. They don't have the annoying little exporting field contents dialog pop up that the user would see. So it kind of happens more silently. Just a better user experience. Won't confuse people like, wait, what is it exporting? What's going on? You just kind of can obfuscate that from your users. Second, I would definitely recommend automating the development workflow a little bit. I'm going to do my best to walk through this. If you're working on your file, you realize, oh, I need to add a new field to the sandbox file. But you can easily enough open that. You external file references listed up in the menu bar. You open the file, make your changes. Now, how do you get that new version of the sandbox file back into the hosted file so the next person to open it gets the changes you just made? What we typically do is we have one script in our sandbox file that is just exports a clone of itself to the desktop. We then have a script in the hosted file, which runs that script, knows to look on the desktop for the resulting file, and reinserts it back in the hosted file. So make some changes in the sandbox file, run that script in the hosted file, it exports a clone from the sandbox file, scoops it back up, and you're done. Now all your changes are reintegrated back into the hosted file, no fuss. Rather than you having to go dig through your temporary directory. Nobody wants to do that. So save you some time. And last, again, I already said it. I already said how dumb I was for thinking I needed to put all of it in the sandbox file. Don't do that. Put it all in the hosted file. Like your UI, your layouts should reference table occurrences that exist in the host file. Your script should reference those table occurrences. All of that. Why should I use this versus any other technique? I'm not saying you should. I'm saying that it's just another arrow in the quiver, right? We have global fields, we have web viewers, we have a whole bunch of stuff at our disposal that we can use. I feel like this is just another way that you can solve problems and make certain things easier, make certain things harder. So use the tool as appropriate. It's not a silver bullet. So why would you use it over global fields? Well, you saw, the multi-window support. You saw the persistence as the user's navigating through different records. Those are just some advantages that it has over global fields. If you're doing something simple, though, global field might still be the other option. Last, why would I use this versus just, you saw that accordion view. I could build that in the web. Maybe you're a really talented JavaScript dev. I'm not. I'm just knowledgeable enough to be dangerous. So, maybe you could do it in a web viewer. Good for you. Most of us, though, I think are FileMaker devs first. And this is all native FileMaker, right? It's tables and fields and layouts and things like that all of us with a little bit of practice could definitely understand and work on without needing to have a background in web development. So you could build pretty much anything in a short story. You could build pretty much anything you want in a web viewer. Would you really want to, though? And actually, that's pretty much all I was going to say. So I wanted to open it to Q&A because I have a sneaking suspicion that this room, smart people, is going to have a couple of questions about what they just saw. But that's the technique. I'd be happy to answer any questions that might have come up.
Back and how you fetched a new version of the file.
Yeah.
Can you pull up an actual script?
I can. Let me see. I'm not sure I have it implemented in the demo. So we can take a look. Oh. I'm cheating a little bit. My hosted file is actually also local. So there we go. I need to put it on the other on the other desktop. No, we're going to do this instead. Find this trick yesterday. There we go. All right. So this is our hosted file. Let's go to Windows. Show window file. So this is our local file. Do I have the script in here? I think I do. There we go. So I have a script in here that is export as clone. It is got the file name, that's whatever it passed to it, path, def.path in this case. Save a copy as clone and exit script. And then have a sibling script in the hosted file that is calling that script in the sandbox file, and knows to look to the desktop for the resulting files. And then reinserts it into the appropriate container. That kind of answers it?
Yeah.
Okay. Again, like otherwise you're going to have to be digging into the temporary directory to go find the file that you've now made changes to and reinsert that in the hosted file. It's going to take you forever. No one wants to do that. This just streamlines that process. Vincenzo.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that, like in the systems that we work with, we have a table that is single record table. That's
Yes.
where the hosted file lives in a container there. And then we have a whole set of scripts so that, like, it's like FileMaker's a collaborative team development tool.
Yep.
And so if other people are also doing schema changes, we have a UI just for the local file management. And someone can just check it out. And that means like, okay, so someone else is, so that communicates with the team that someone else has actually checked it out and says who checked it out.
Yep.
And then they can make their changes. And then when they close the solution, it actually warns them, oh, you have the file checked out. Alec built a whole bunch of scripts around this that manages all of that file management. And definitely encourage anyone who goes down this path that you do want to have like a set of scripts that manage, the checking in, the checking out, and if you do things with, generating a DDR or an XML.
Got included in your DDR.
For analysis.
Yeah.
When at the time of check-in, you can generate the DDR for that file and add it into a container and then, generate it as part of the process of running the analysis, because that's another challenge. Maybe you didn't cover it, but like if you want to analyze this, how do you then generate, the XML for all the files on the server? You'd have to have a way to open it and export it. And because it's in a container, it becomes harder to do that. So
Yeah, and specifically if you're trying to do it on server, right? If you're doing it locally, like say the DDR does grab any of your related files, including this, but Vin's totally right. We're trying to move towards especially Inspector Pro 8, which I encourage you to stop by the booth and check out because it's amazing. But if you're trying to do all this on the server, the sandbox file does pose a little bit of a challenge in that because it's not hosted anywhere. So where are you going to get the analysis for it? So totally good point.
How do you get the accordion thing? What are you doing?
So it's not that dissimilar from a virtual list. I can show you the actual layout out here. It's a sub-summary, which is sorting by accordion sort. No, really ingenious name. Accordion sort is a unstored while loop. And what it is doing is when I click on a expand, it is marking that record as being expanded just in a Boolean field. And then that unstored calculation is looping through every record that is using get end record, looping through every record above that record to see like what place, how many things have been expanded and whatnot. And it's like, so it's basically just doing, because of the sub-summary saying like, 1. Now there's a sub-summary. 2. Now there's a sub-summary for each one. So it increments that number for every one it needs to appear, and it increments it at the point where we need the sub-summary piece to appear.
Are you switching layouts?
No, one layout. So let me put the field on the layout because that's going to probably make that a little bit more apparent. So we're going to put accordion sort. There we go. And we will unlock. Actually, no, let's just make the layout wider just for the purpose of demonstration. So you can see, yeah.
So you're using hide to make those rows look like.
Correct. There's basically two layouts in my sub-summary, two versions of the row in my sub-summary part, and I'm conditionally hiding it depending on whether it's part of that or not, and then I'm calculating out which portion it is. So you can see here, if I expand two of them, you go 1.1.1, then I jump to 3, 3.1, 3.2, 3.7, so on and so. Yes, sir.
So early in your presentation, you had to bind the two files together with the security.
Yeah.
Are there things short of like renaming the file that would compromise that link?
I've not found any yet. Security is a good question generally. I should have probably added a slide on this specifically, so I appreciate you reminding me. The sandbox file, so in addition to the authorizing the file, I've not run into a case where it forgets that authorization yet. And again, we've been using for going on 7 years, so it doesn't seem to be a problem. From a security standpoint, what we do is we create a user access level user privilege set for people who would be users of our hosted application, but they all have basically access to all tables, all fields, because as by default, that file has no data in it. So there's no security risk for them being in the file, because the only way that file gets data into it is by being fed by the hosted file.
And how are they authenticated to the file?
Auto login via an account with that level of access. Not full access, mind you, but full read, write access to all the tables and fields.
Yeah. So could in say nightmare scenario, okay, could someone hijack the file to inject something that you're not foreseeing?
So it's a good question. They would need, there are no layouts in the file, basically. There might be one, but it's like an empty layout. So because they have, and if they could figure out how to get in with full access, probably, but they would need to get around that sort of mention, because the level of access, they have full read write, but they would then need to be able to interact with the file some way, and there's no UI to allow them to do it. So it should be non-permissive enough to prevent bad actors. And you also have to go through the trouble of finding it in the temp directory and know what it's called, and et cetera, et cetera. But theoretically, yes, but I feel like it's a low likelihood.
And encryption address is not an option. Again, I know there's no data, but in how we say, for backups, for instance, usually when we say, well, if someone can get their hands on a local file, it's kind of game over. Yeah. So it's just those concerns are just
absolutely. Yeah. I mean, in theory, I guess there is some security where the user could leave behind data in the file, because it's the temp directory we found is not always cleared out when FileMaker quits. And once the file's opened, you can't really interact with it from FileMaker anymore. So you can't delete it on exit, for example. So in theory, if that's a concern, if they have super sensitive data, that in theory is getting potentially left behind on the client machine. Again, they'd have no view access into it because there's no layouts for them to display it. So they would need to get around that level of security. But in theory, the data is there even if it's encrypted.
Yeah, but you could clean up after yourself too.
That's the thing, you can't really necessarily. I mean, you could truncate the table or something like that, for sure. You could do that, but you can't delete the file. Because once the file is referenced by your hosted file, it's FileMaker now has locked that file.
But you could close the file and then delete it.
You can't, it's weird. FileMaker still remembers.
I'm sorry, can't close the file.
Yeah, if you even if you close it, FileMaker knows that you referenced it at some point, so it hangs on to it until you close the hosted application.
Goes into your hidden window.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's a pain. I wish you could.
Yeah, so would I.
In the back, I say.
So just coming full circle.
Yeah.
The local file is just dumbed down.
Very, very dumb.
When you go into edit mode here, we're either, it's basically just like a one-to-one relationship between like whatever table is hosted and whatever dumb table you want to edit. And you're like, when you hit edit on whichever one.
Yeah, but we can we'll kind of play it at home here.
Did you just, assuming there was like no, on the left, what's hosted data and what's dump data?
So everything in this view is hosted with the exception of the filters.
Okay, so go into edit.
Once I'm here, pressing that button is scraping up a JSON representation of that store for that week for all the employees and all their shifts.
Okay,
And then very, very quickly, creating records in the sandbox file.
Okay.
And then you're modifying that, make all your changes. It validates that all those changes make sense, repackages them up, and sends that JSON to server, and the server modifies it ideally transactionally.
What you were just saying is you could technically just truncate whatever all that was at the end and
Yes.
then you're done.
And typically I do that. Typically, like I will put some relationships in the sandbox file that have like cascading deletes. So in this case, the most highest level here is going to be the store, right? So I'll just like on my way out, I'll delete the store record, and that will delete all its children all the way down the chain, and that makes me feel a little warm and fuzzy. To your point about the security, that like I'm not leaving breadcrumbs behind me. What's up, Vince?
Yeah, but you're not truncating everything. But the thing is that you can have multiple windows. And
Yeah.
You can have different edits going on in different windows. So when you cancel out of this one, you just cancel this session of this state of these records. You don't want to truncate everything because, again, there could be situations where the client is managing, venues, different venues, and they're
Totally.
doing it all locally, et cetera. So-
Yeah, when I'm done editing, typically I'll delete the record I was just editing and all of its children, but maybe on last window close or something like that, truncate the local file before the sandbox file before leaving, for example, like just as that little extra sanity check.
And so the other thing about security is, it's going into the local file, but it's accessing data that you already have access to.
Yep.
So in a sense, it's like, well, you could get really, really picky about PII data and all this, but it's almost no different as having it loaded in globals.
Yep.
It's like if you have access to the data, you're still accessing that data.
Yeah, the hosted file is responsible for managing whether or not you have access to see it in the first place.
Right. The good thing is you're cleaning up after you're done. And if the person were to open it, and even if they were able to get to a layout, which they can't, to see any rows of data, then they would just see data that they already had access to. But that's being cleaned up anyway. So.
Yeah, I liken it to the level of like security concern I have is the same level of security concern I have that people can take screenshots of the hosted application anyways, right? Like, so there's it's actually less than that because that actually is showing you data. Like, I feel like at some level, there's a certain level that you just can't get around that a bad actor really wanted to store that data locally. They're going to, but I don't think there's any glaring holes in the file again, because there's no layout. They all don't have full access to that file, even if they could get it at the temp directory.
What exactly is in the sandbox file?
What is in it?
Yeah, like, is it just,
Yeah, I can
we gotta take a peek?
Yeah, for sure. So like this is, in this instance, these are the three tables I have in the sandbox file. I have a window table. Again, that's how I'm driving the multi-window. I have a store table and I have a shift table. That's pretty much it. Relationship-wise, there literally aren't any. There's just the three table occurrences. That's it. That's really,
And the
what all the
windows,
magic is really happening in the hosted file where I'm referencing those. So any of the blue table occurrences are from the sandbox file. So that main UI that we've been looking at of the hosted data, the context of that layout is a window record from the sandbox file, which is then just grabbing related data from the hosted file. So we have a window, which is then saving the filter parameters in a store record, and then that is grabbing the related hosted data from hosted data records. You were next.
So why wouldn't someone say they have a separation model and just put the entire interface file on the local computer?
Could you repeat the question?
Are there problems?
So that's more the traditional data separation. This is kind of the inverse of that, right? It's like you're maintaining the UI in one place in the hosted file. This is just allowing you to have data that is unique to that user. So it's kind of the inverse of the data separation model, which is you have a UI file that's potentially just local on the user's machine, but all the data is hosted. But now you need to worry about versioning of make sure the user has the correct file on their machine and things like that. With this, we're exporting that file every time they open the hosted file because it's the opening the source.
You ever tried the separation model with?
I've worked on 2 systems with data separation model. The one time I thought it was functional was I was doing a FileMaker Go app. Like that was helpful because it offloaded a lot of the weight. You're not transferring much over the potentially slow cellular connection. I didn't love working on a desktop app where it was that because then I'm like, oh, I need to add a field or change the field definition or whatever. Oh, I got to go open that other file. I got to go manage that. So it felt like extra steps. Again, the benefit of the sandbox file is that it's kind of a set it and forget it. Like you just build the fields you need, and then you basically never look at it again because you can make all the changes to the UIs and the layouts just in the hosted file.
You ever had problems with the global tab?
Nope.
Working?
So the only problem, it's funny, I had not run into a problem ever with this until building this demo, interestingly, where you need to make sure that you don't reference anything from the sandbox file in your on first window open, for example, or on whatever layout your file gets to first until it's been exported. Other FileMaker is going to start freaking out, like, I can't find that file that you're talking about. What are you doing? Point me to it. And normally it's fine. We just go to a hosted table and a layout that's based on a hosted table, and in the background export the file, and then by the time you start using it, it's already there. In this file, for some reason, I made a copy of a table occurrence that was previously referencing a sandbox file table, but I changed it to be a hosted file. And for whatever reason, somewhere in FileMaker's memory, it remembered that that used to be a sandbox table occurrence, so it started freaking out. So I deleted that table occurrence, rebuilt it, and it was fine. It's the only time I've ever seen it, literally the first time in 7 years. So I don't know what order of operations I did to trigger that, but that's the only time I've run into a problem with it kind of being weird about the external file reference.
I'm curious if you're doing a presentation UI, so you could send a JSON payload to the client and do a virtual list
Yes.
presentation. So how do you decide when you'd rather unpack it into local records and use this approach versus virtual list, or do you just always do it this way even if you're not editing?
It's a good question. We've done some, maybe in my next DevCon stage, we've done some cool, like you're talking about, kind of virtual list, mostly with button bar calcs reading giant JSON objects for complex, virtual, grid views and things like that. So we definitely still would do that. It's not in the local file or the sandbox file. Typically, it's where the user needs to interact with the data. That would be my threshold for it. I think you in the middle there had a question.
I'm not sure. I don't know. Maybe I'm not thinking of something obvious, but does it ever cause problems if you make changes to the sandbox and then run the script to export it and re-import it if the end user hasn't, they don't reopen the window between the time?
Good question. So we're typically developing in we have a dev and a prod environment. So Vince alluded to, we have some fields most our solutions have a solution table where this file is being stored. We have a couple of supporting fields with when was the most current version that's uploaded and things like that. So, and we can warn devs in particular of, hey, Red made changes, you should probably exit and come, because you can't actually just re-export it because, again, the file is referenced by FileMaker now, and so it's kind of locked. So we do have some of our cases where it warns the dev, Red made a change, you should probably exit and come back in to get the latest changes, things like that. So that is a thing, and because we're working in a dev and prod environment, we're using data migration tools to push to production. We aren't impacting users by making changes to it.
So when you push to production, what happens with the end user?
No, because it gets exported every time. Either way, they just get the freshest version the next time they open the app.
Gotcha. So if they haven't opened the app, then they're still on the previous version.
They wouldn't even be able to reference it because the temp directory typically gets cleaned out anyways.
Okay.
So, typically. I haven't quite figured out what the rule is there because I've definitely been able to find it after the fact, but it's supposed to be when the app closes, but macOS does what it wants to do. Vince?
Yeah, just to add a comment to that. I mean, we're in team collaborative development, so we're on the development server.
Yeah.
And so oftentimes we have a dedicated Slack channel. And so Brendan will say, hey, I just checked out the local file. So everybody's alerted, okay, he's working on it and he's making changes to it. And then he'll say, a few minutes later, I just checked in a new copy. So if you want to be, more more current because maybe it's an area that you need to test something that he just worked on, you would have to close the file and open it again to get a new file.
Exactly.
So, but we're in constant communication to be notified of that, and that only happens on the development server. So the client is also notified that they need to close it and open it again.
That was my question, yeah.
Yeah, so that we're in communication with the client if they're doing testing as well. So not only if they're in testing alongside our development process, they're getting notified that they need to close it and open it.
And I think like some applications I've worked with, like tied into like we have a master navigation script, let's say, and that's something people are going to be using to get around between all the different layouts in the system. We'll just tie in there to check when did I export my sandbox file? What is the most current version? If those timestamps are in the wrong order, then alert the user that they need to exit and get the new file.
Okay, that was my question.
For example, like so if you have a place where like a user's likely to get pinged, you can tag it on there, for example.
Okay, that's cool.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, quick question. So I saw the multi-window function. It seems like it's a state management where if it opens different windows, it opens that dummy file to hold the data. Does that affect the performance by any chance, or it doesn't as much?
Not really. So I think I understand. So if I'm not understanding your question correctly, please let me know.
Of course.
But so effectively, like I have in this, there's a script trigger for on new window open, right? Like so we're just leveraging that. We're creating the layout context here is already a sandbox file table. On new window open, create a new record. And then we are then reaching root from that table to another sandbox table that is the store and setting these filter variables, values there. And then from that store, we're grabbing all the hosted data. So in there, it's just IDs, grabbing whatever you need from the hosted data. So not really any performance hit necessarily. And again, because of the creation of the record and all that is all being managed locally, it's all very fast.
But you can't return to this hosted version and reopen another.
And again,
In the host, like you can't, if you open the local file, right, you can't return to the hosted and then reopen another file set. Or reopen another instance of that. Because like with you're transporting the JSON, like you're transporting the JSON.
yeah,
right?
like so it will let me edit in two places, and these are going to be functioning completely independently. Although that actually just broke, which is funny. So that's a good question. Apparently, there's something with my UI. Actually, no, that makes sense because there's only one instance of that store in the table, so it actually is like freaking out a little bit. Oh, now it just broke it. Thanks, Paul. Good question.
Normally that's why
Thanks.
a lot of use cases we use cards and it's locked to a single instance, right? But you can't do multiple windows. But
Yeah, totally. So yeah, like in the multi-window, you'd have to account for, maybe you can't edit the same record at the same time. So that goes back to managing state and make sure that that's not happening. So you could actually just have a field, in theory, in the sandbox file version of the store table that says like, I'm being edited. So that would prevent from other windows from that same record being modified as well. For example, just a simple solution. I saw a question in the back there somewhere.
I was just going to add that, we do manage that in some instances. Brendan built that logic in there so that like if you're editing this person in this window, you have another window and you're editing the same person.
Yeah.
It lets you do that. It's last one in wins. And it just manages
The only problem is like if you're trying to, if your logic isn't accounting for the fact that you might already have sandbox file records for that same record you're modifying,
right?
Like then you need to account for that in your scripting. Which is what happened here. It was like, wait a minute, that ID already exists. What the hell's happening?
And your window is a modal window, but in some
I'm actually cheating. This is actually like a technique that I came up with. This is actually a 1 pixel card on the background that is dimming the background. Like, so it's not really modal because I can still kind of come back to it, but like it kind of is modal.
Okay.
I don't know. I like that technique because the user then can still look back and reference the hosted file, like without actually being able to interact with it. I don't know. It's a little UI thing. Some in the front.
So when I see this model, I quickly kind of want to blend it with putting the important records for like an Atlanta user in front of them versus like an LA user.
Okay.
But then one of the things you don't have control over is their device storage or memory. So then does this kind of fail, or you discourage that when you start have to manage import techniques or like certain file sets?
Yeah, so you're talking about like if someone has to import a really large data set or something like that. Yeah, you could definitely import. I could see a case where you import the records like as staging into the sandbox file, for example, so that they can do data curation of some kind before pushing it to server. we typically tend to do all of our imports on the server anyways, just because of the performance benefits. If you, again, user from Australia, China, something like that, the native import running locally, like if their connection gets interrupted, bad things happen. So we tend to like have a container, they drop their file, we push that to the server, we do the import on server. We have a staging table in the hosted file that we're importing into, typically, but I think you could use the sandbox file for that depending on your circumstance. Yes, sir?
I love the idea of using this, but what I wonder is how do you get data from the server to the user?
So, like, for editing, for example?
Yes, I don't understand.
JSON. So we have a script specifically, actually, and what I found that I do typically is I'll have a calculation field oftentimes in the hosted table that is ready to go JSON representation of that record. That can just be, so, oh, I have this record ID, go grab its JSON object from that field, pass it to the sandbox file, and it builds.
Calculation already.
It's a calculation already, just so it's already ready to go. It doesn't need to be calculated in real time. And then, so a stored calculation, not unstored ideally. Grab the file, grab the JSON data, pass it to the sandbox file, and rebuild the records from that. And it's all local, so it happens so fast that just with a simple freeze window, you can build that really quickly. I have a system that's building, I think at most 700 records or something like that, and it takes no more than, the longest I've seen it take, even on a like slow connection, about 5 seconds for it to build. And I just have to land on a window with a little web viewer with a little like, give me a second, and users are fine with that. They understand they're modifying 600 records at once. It might take a second.
But those 600 records are locked. Well,
in our case, that's a last in win scenario. Again, it's a project management tool,
Okay.
so we're not too worried about like the likelihood that 2 people are going to be modifying that same project at the same time. Like, just hasn't ever happened, so we're not worried about it. Okay.
Is the advantage of keeping all your layouts in the hosted file just that you don't have to update the sandbox file as often? As far as checking in, doing that process, is that the only advantage you gain?
I could go on for a while on this one. You get access to everything that's in the hosted file, your theme, value lists,
Sure.
custom functions, all that stuff.
Yep.
So you get the value of all that, like, is shared effectively. So you don't have to be maintaining that in 2 places. There's also just the weight of the sandbox file. When I had everything in the sandbox file and I was exporting it, that like splash screen to export it was, because I had to export all that extra weight. Once I got all that out and also started exporting a clone rather than just putting whatever file I had back in, that file is now a couple hundred kilobytes and it's fast. So there's performance benefits as well as just makes your life easier. Don't do it. It's not worth it, man. Anything else? That's it. One more. All right.
Yeah, you said that in the local file, you store the search criteria.
Yeah. So, like here, so like we can look at Tate again, for example.
Yeah. So what is different than if you have multiple windows? What is then different from window to window, and how do you decide which record is?
Yeah, so we have to look at the graph to kind of get that. So the context of that layout we're looking at is a window context, which then has child store records, but those are it's kind of a join table almost. So I have a unique record per store per window. So when I have more than one window open in this case, this is one window record. This is another window record. I guess I can show they're one of three, but they're different records. Here, if I type something else, this is a different under the hood sandbox store record that is related to this window record than this one. So it has its own set of filters and IDs and things like that that is storing to grab the related hosted data. Did that answer the question a little bit?
Yes,
Okay.
it answered. But do you have any idea how, if you would use a normal approach with having records that are just shown per window?
Oh, like, so if you weren't grabbing related records through it?
Yeah, I'm looking for something like a replacement for the global fields.
You can definitely do, like, I have plenty of layouts on hosted on line applications where we're not doing this. I've actually never deployed the multi-window solution here to a production system. This is mostly a exercise because it's something I think that we all know is a bit of a challenge in FileMaker. I agree. I would rather not be looking through portals and stuff like that. I'd rather be looking at the real hosted records. So if that's a criteria, You might lose the multi-window support, but you would still get the memory portion, right? Because you could still have a record per hosted record storing the state. So you would still have the ability to be like, oh, I'm going to go to this one and search on, change which week I'm looking at here and jump back to this other record, and it remembers where you left off. So you still get that benefit, but you would lose potentially the multi-window support because you have to be in and maybe one of you is more clever than me. The only way I thought to do it was have the record context be per window, at which point you have to grab related. Well, that answer. I think I saw someone at the very back.
You answered. That's a dumb record. The parent record is a dumb record.
Very, very dumb. Yeah. It's just a unique ID for the window you're looking in, and then it's grabbing its child store record.
So this would be a bad layout to try to do data behind it.
Because you're doing everything through portals and whatnot, probably, yeah.
Right. Yeah, I mean, the context is your dumb record. Like, you've got 3 dumb records, but you've got obviously 4 real records.
Correct. Yeah. We have a cross join, whatever, UIUX records of stores on the left, grab the related records for this store for that week in the middle, and then grab the individual shifts for the selected user from that portal on the right. But there are 3 different table occurrences, 3 different portals.
Because it's a dumb record, because FileMaker is really only showing you what you kind of see at the moment. It's not.
Oh, in terms of the lazy loading that portals have?
Yeah.
Yeah, if those records are really wide, I could imagine if you could still, but that would be a problem if you're in list view too. If anything, you have the advantage of portals being loaded separately than the main layout. So, Reddit, I guess, is a good way to describe that. Sir?
Near when you started, you mentioned the use of this for parent records, child records, grandparent or grandchild records, and being able to calculate those.
Yeah, or at least validate them as a group. Yeah.
Okay. So how does this do that compared to unstored calculations, or what's a use case?
So you definitely
scenario of that.
I'll give you the prime example of when the first project I used is on. It's a project management tool. They're managing purchase orders for a project. They could have a couple dozen purchase orders for a given project. And each of those purchase orders is quarterized, as in has a certain amount of its value being spent in a given fiscal quarter. All that quarterization needs to add up to the total of the PO. Always. It can never not add up to the total of the PO. So because I can validate in real time, they can be adding those numbers, and when they go to hit save, I can say, no, the third PO here on the list, the quarterization total doesn't add up to the PO's total amount. You got to go back and fix that before I even let that get into the data stream.
Okay, so there's nothing there that benefits more complex, hundreds of calculations.
I would say you mentioned unstored calcs. We typically at UIUX don't put unstored calcs in hosted applications, only because typically they're not very performant. But because this is all now local, get away with using even ridiculously complicated unstored calculations, and they're normally still pretty fast. Like the accordion view, for example, is using a while loop inside of an unstored calc that is analyzing every record in your current bound set in real time, and it's perfectly fast. You could never get away with that in a host application over the LAN, in my experience anyways. So it's not anything new necessarily, it's just it's way faster, I think is the answer. So you can get away with doing more complex validation in real time.
I think it's an unstored calc for the JSON representation that gets sent to the sandbox.
Right, yeah, stored typically, because we tend to not have unstored calc,
right.
But yeah, we have a stored calculation of the state on the server, and we have an unstored calc in the sandbox file of what needs to get sent back with the pending changes. So you just, again, scoop up the contents of that field, send it back to the server, reprocess it into the records. Sir?
I can't remember FileMaker's affected that changed their performance. As we're looking at related records, does it only download from the server data that you see, or is it downloading full record?
I believe, oh, in terms of like the full width of the record, or
Like we're seeing like 2 data fields on the left side.
I think it's still the Vince probably knows better. I think it's the full width of the record still, but it's only the ones that you can kind of immediately see. But I do know that data loading in portals is now threaded, so it's like each of these portals. If you put more burden on a given one of them, it isn't impacting the entire layout. So other things would still be responsive if you're doing it that way.
You're storing more text, the record's bigger.
Yeah, well, a wider record is always going to take longer to load. In my experience, anyways. Someone more technically savvy on the back end of FileMaker might disagree with me, but that's been my experience. And I will say, like, I put this together specifically to demo, like, kind of cool things you can do with it. Again, most of the applications I build, I'm using, like, layouts that are context based on still on hosted tables rather than being all portals and stuff like that. But we're still using it to drive selections, the sandbox file to drive selection states and things like that. So you can do it either way. I'm saying that to drive, but I wanted to show you guys the multi-window thing just because I feel like that's kind of a particular thorn in the FileMaker side, and I thought that'd be an interesting thing to demo here today. Yes.
Can you describe again how you used it in the portal filter?
Like down here?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's just a field in the field I'm typing into is a sandbox file field, and I just have a condition. I think actually the layout, the portal definition, I think just has that as part of its.
It's a stored field, right?
Yeah, the stored field in the table, in the sandbox table. This is then just filter portals based off of the state of whatever's in that. So.
Did it update after each keystroke?
Oh yeah, I have a debounce on it just on keystroke. No, that's just refresh portal on refresh portal on keystroke, or commit refresh portal on keystroke, go back to where you're typing. Go back to that field object, go back to that cursor position. Yes, sir.
Did I hear this correctly? So I modify Bob's project's due date and I commit that with JSON and I update the server. Now everyone else that needs to know the new due date, you back in the server and they get that update instead of trying to sync records?
Correct, yeah. So if they're modifying in the sandbox file, they wouldn't see it, which is like the record update problem. But and I'll probably go by there's a like after session like Q&A room. I forget what room it is. Tyler, do you know what room it is?
Let me see if I can.
So if they're already modifying, then you'll need to manage that state if that's something you're worried about. But basically, the actual like sending the JSON on the server and editing it, in our experience, takes like a tenth of a second. Right. So like as soon as that updates, the user will see the changes just as if they had modified it.
Okay.
Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
Is there a FileMaker file online that we can download that does this? That's like a pared down.
I probably can clean up this demo a little bit and put up on the files. I don't know how Claire's handling that. The presentation itself is going to be shared, but I don't know about the like collateral files. But I'll talk to the powers that be.
Andrew was Philosopher's Rock downstairs on the first floor.
Okay, cool. So if anybody wants to talk more, I'll be downstairs for about half an hour, something like that. If you're interested in doing this more full time, UIUX is hiring, so come check out the booth.